Erica, Kristy Wesselman's mom told the court and her daughter's killer that she lost a part of herself the day her daughter was murdered.
She went to a store and vanished. Simple words that hide a heartbreaking truth. A girl's disappearance shook the quiet town of Glen Ellyn, leaving her family desperate for answers that wouldn't come for decades. For 30 years, the mystery of what really happened haunted everyone involved. But behind the silence was an unexpected truth waiting to be uncovered, thanks to advances in science and unwavering determination. This isn't just a story about loss, it's about hope, justice, and the power of never giving up. This is a story of a truth that takes time, but has finally come. Remembering Kristy Wesselman. On a warm summer day in July 1985, a quiet Chicago suburb was forever changed by a horrific crime that would haunt the community for decades. Kristy Wesselman, a vibrant 15-year-old girl from Glen Ellyn, Illinois, left her house for what seemed like an ordinary errand, a quick trip to the nearby Jewel grocery store. She never returned. The next day, her lifeless body was found in a wooded area less than 1,000 feet from her home. She had been raped and murdered. Kristy's tragic death marked the beginning of one of the most haunting unsolved cases in Illinois' recent history. For over 3 decades, her murder remained a cold case, unresolved but never forgotten. It wasn't until 2015, thanks to advancements in DNA technology and a long overdue break in the case, that justice was finally served. Today, we will revisit Kristy Wesselman's case not only to highlight the facts, but to understand the immense impact her death had on her family, her community, and the legal system. Her story is a painful reminder of how vulnerable life can be and how the search for justice can span generations. A life interrupted. Who was Kristy? Kristy was the kind of teenager people remembered for her bright smile and kind spirit. She was a student at Glen Bard South High School, where she was known as both studious and athletic. Described by her friends and teachers as sweet, trusting, and down-to-earth, Kristy was, in many ways, a typical American teenager navigating adolescence with a sense of optimism and curiosity. Kristy lived with her family in a modest, tree-lined neighborhood in Glen Ellyn, a picturesque suburb of Chicago. Glen Ellyn was, and remains, a middle-class community known for its good schools, low crime rates, and close-knit neighborhoods. For families like the Wesselmans, it seemed like the kind of place where children could still walk to the store or ride their bikes with relative freedom, a place that felt insulated from the violence and chaos that plagued larger cities. But all of that changed on July 21, 1985. Sit back, we're now heading to the riveting details. A community in transition. To understand the impact of Kristy's murder, one must appreciate the setting in which it occurred. Glen Ellyn in the 80s was experiencing slow but steady change. The community had grown significantly in the post-World War II era, and by the 80s, it had solidified its identity as a safe suburban haven for middle-class families. Crime was rare and often non-violent. Most residents didn't lock their doors. Teenagers like Kristy could walk or bike to the grocery store without fear. In fact, on the day she disappeared, Kristy had told her mother she was going to buy candy at a nearby Jewel Osco, just a quick trip on foot through a patch of woods that linked her home to the shopping center. No one thought twice about it. That sense of safety was shattered the next day when Kristy's body was found. Her murder was brutal and senseless. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed multiple times. Suddenly, Glen Ellyn was no longer immune to the horrors of the outside world. Parents became fearful. Children were warned not to walk alone. Trust, once a defining characteristic of the town, was replaced by suspicion. The tragedy made local and regional headlines.
For the murder of 15-year-old Kristy Wesselman, who was sexually assaulted then stabbed to death back in 1985.
Police launched an intense investigation, but despite their efforts, the killer remained elusive. Tips poured in, suspects were questioned, and forensic evidence was gathered. But the case eventually went cold. What made the Kristy Wesselman case so enduring wasn't just the heinousness of the crime, it was the deep wound it left behind. Her family, especially her mother, Kristy Wesselman, never stopped searching for answers. Over the years, Christy's name would resurface in local news and cold case files. Her story would be used to advocate for improved forensic techniques, sex offender monitoring, and victim advocacy. In many ways, the persistence of Christy's loved ones, combined with advancements in criminal investigation, helped ensure her case would not be forgotten. When a break finally came, 30 years later, it felt like both a relief and a reopening of old wounds. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. A routine walk with a tragic ending. On Sunday, July 21st, 1985, the Wesselman family was settling into a calm summer evening in their Glen Ellyn neighborhood. The day had been warm, typical of suburban Chicago in July, and Kristy Wesselman was enjoying the final weeks of summer before school resumed in the fall. Around 6:00 p.m., Christy told her mother she was going to walk to the nearby Jewel Osco store, located less than a mile away, to buy some candy and a soda. She wore a pink tank top, white shorts, and sandals. The route she chose was familiar to her, one she had taken many times before. It led through a wooded path and connected her neighborhood directly to the shopping plaza on Butterfield Road. This shortcut, while somewhat secluded, was widely used by locals and never considered dangerous. Christy left her house with confidence, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. When Christy failed to return home by nightfall, her mother, Kristy Wesselman, began to worry. At first, the family considered that Christy might have stopped to talk with a friend or taken a detour. But as the hours passed and darkness fell, the concern turned into fear. By late evening, her mother reported Christy missing to the Glen Ellyn Police Department. A search began almost immediately, with officers and volunteers canvassing the area, retracing Christy's steps, and alerting nearby residents. The wooded trail she had used to reach the store quickly became the focus of their attention. Despite their efforts that night, there was no trace of Christy. And then came the horrifying discovery. On the morning of July 22nd, less than 24 hours after she disappeared, searchers found Christy's body in a wooded area just off the trail, less than 1,000 feet from her home. The location was within earshot of the residential street, yet hidden from plain view by tall grass and trees. What investigators found was deeply disturbing. Christy had been assaulted and then violently killed.
The 1985 rape and murder of 15-year-old Kristy Wesselman.
She suffered stab wounds to her chest, and there were clear signs she had been targeted and overpowered. A shoe and some of her jewelry were missing, possibly taken as a trophy or discarded to mislead investigators. The scene was quickly secured, and forensic specialists began gathering evidence. At the time, DNA technology was still in its infancy, but samples were collected with care, including fibers, biological material, and anything that could link a suspect to the crime. Unfortunately, the science of the day was not advanced enough to yield results. The community of Glen Ellyn was rocked by the news. Shock turned into sorrow and fear. Parents began escorting their children everywhere. The quiet sense of safety the town had long enjoyed was shattered. Early leads and dead ends. In the hours and days that followed, police conducted interviews with neighbors, classmates, store employees, and anyone who might have seen Christy during her walk. Several people reported seeing her at the store and on the trail, but no one had noticed anything out of the ordinary, or at least nothing they could definitively tie to a suspect. Rumors began circulating. Was this a random act of violence, or had Christy been followed? Was the attacker someone local? Authorities followed up on every lead, even detaining and questioning individuals who had prior criminal records or had been seen in the area at suspicious times. Still, no strong suspect emerged. As the days turned into weeks, the trail grew cold. Media attention and public response. Christy's case drew significant media attention in the Chicago suburbs. Newspapers featured her photo, and reported regularly on the investigation's progress. Police released composite sketches based on vague eyewitness accounts, but no viable suspect could be identified. Local residents organized vigils and memorials. A reward fund was established for information leading to an arrest. But despite the best efforts of law enforcement and the public, Christy's killer seemed to vanish without a trace. Investigators were left with few options. They preserved the evidence, hoping that one day science would catch up with the crime. For Christy's family, the pain of her loss was deepened by the lack of closure. Her mother, in particular, became an outspoken advocate for cold case investigations, never letting her daughter's name fade from public memory.
We will always miss Christy.
Her classmates grew up and moved on with their lives, but the memory of that summer day in 1985 stayed with them, like a scar on an otherwise peaceful community. What had started as a short walk to the store had ended in tragedy. And for nearly 30 years, Christy's case remained a haunting mystery, a story frozen in time. Investigation and suspects. When Kristy Wesselman was reported missing, the Glen Ellyn Police Department responded swiftly. Officers began canvassing the wooded trail where she was last believed to have walked, interviewing neighbors and searching the surrounding area. Volunteers from the community joined in, hoping to locate Christy before it was too late. After her body was discovered the next day in a wooded area not far from her home, the focus of the investigation shifted rapidly from a missing persons case to a homicide. Investigators worked around the clock to gather forensic evidence from the crime scene. Fibers, hair samples, and other physical traces were carefully collected and preserved. Although DNA technology was not yet available in its modern form, detectives hoped that some of the material might prove useful in the future. Despite their urgency and commitment, police were unable to find a solid suspect in the early days of the investigation. They conducted dozens of interviews with people who lived in the area, frequented the shopping center near where Christy had last been seen, or might have crossed paths with her on the trail. Some recalled seeing a man in the vicinity, described generally as being in his 20s or 30s, wearing a plain t-shirt and shorts. But the details were vague, and eyewitness accounts often conflicted. A composite sketch was released to the public based on these descriptions, but it did not lead to any breakthroughs. The search for suspects covered a wide range. Investigators examined known offenders in the area, including individuals with histories of inappropriate behavior or prior convictions. Police also questioned transient individuals who may have passed through town, as well as male students and acquaintances of Christy's. Though these interviews were necessary, they led to no clear leads and placed emotional strain on many local families. With every name investigated and every alibi checked, the sense of urgency began to fade into quiet frustration. The media kept the case in the public eye. Local newspapers ran Christy's photo and updates on the investigation for weeks. The community, still in shock from the brutality of the crime, rallied to support the Wesselman family. Candlelight vigils were held, and funds were raised to offer a reward for information. Still, nothing new emerged. Leads dried up. The case, for all its initial intensity, began to stall. There were many reasons for the lack of progress. For one, forensic science in the mid-80s simply did not have the capability to analyze biological evidence the way it does today. DNA profiling was in its infancy, and laboratories lacked the tools to process samples with precision. Investigators relied primarily on witness testimony and circumstantial connections. Yet, human memory, especially under stress, often falters. Witnesses offered inconsistent accounts, or later revised their statements. Another significant hurdle was the lack of national databases. Fingerprint and offender records had to be searched manually, case by case, which slowed progress and left many investigations, including Christy's, at a standstill. Even though the official investigation slowed, Christy's family never stopped pushing for answers. Her mother, Sandy Wesselman, stayed in frequent contact with detectives and kept the public aware of Christy's case through local news and anniversary interviews.
My daughter Christy and I were going to watch old movies and relax at home.
Every year that passed without an arrest was a painful reminder that justice had yet to be served. Still, the Wesselmans refused to give up hope. By the early 90s, advances in forensic technology began to offer a glimmer of possibility. New techniques in DNA analysis emerged, allowing laboratories to re-examine biological material that had been preserved for years. Many law enforcement agencies began to reopen cold cases, testing old evidence with modern tools. Fortunately, the Glen Ellyn police had preserved the evidence from Christy's crime scene carefully. It had been stored properly and remained viable for future examination. While the technology was promising, it would still take years before DNA testing became common practice in local jurisdictions. Christy's case remained open but inactive, waiting for a moment when science and opportunity would align. In the meantime, the Wesselman family continued to speak out, never letting the public forget the loss they endured and the young life that had been taken far too soon. From 1985 through the early 90s, the investigation into Kristy Wesselman's murder represented the tragic intersection of dedicated police work and the limitations of the time. It became a case that symbolized not only the fragility of youth, but also the hope that even cold cases can eventually be solved. What remained was a community forever altered and a family holding on to the belief that one day the truth would be found. And it was found. Cold case era and DNA breakthrough. In the years that followed Kristy Wesselman's murder, the case quietly transitioned from an active investigation to what law enforcement refers to as a cold case. It remained open, but with no new leads or suspects, there was little that detectives could do. Despite the silence surrounding the investigation, the pain endured by Christy's family, and the lingering fear in the Glen Ellyn community never disappeared. For them, time did not bring closure. It only deepened the sense of injustice. The 90s brought with them a wave of technological advancements that began to change the landscape of criminal investigations across the country. One of the most transformative developments was the refinement of DNA analysis. No longer limited to blood types or unreliable fiber comparisons, forensic scientists were now able to identify individuals with remarkable precision based on their genetic material. Law enforcement agencies started reopening unsolved cases, particularly those involving physical evidence that had been carefully preserved. Christy's case was one of those selected for review. In the early 2000s, nearly 2 decades after her death, the DuPage County Sheriff's Office submitted biological samples collected from the crime scene for DNA testing. The evidence had been stored properly and remained in good condition. When processed, it yielded a full DNA profile of the suspect. It was a monumental breakthrough, one that gave investigators their most powerful lead since the day Christy's body was found. However, there was still a significant challenge. The DNA did not match anyone in the existing criminal databases. This development represented both a breakthrough and a roadblock. Investigators now had the identity of the killer encoded in a digital profile. Yet, without a match, the profile was only a partial answer. The question remained, who did it belong to? With no one to connect it to, the case continued to sit idle, awaiting either a tip or a fortuitous database hit. For the Wesselman family, it was another cruel twist. The science had finally arrived, but the name behind the crime was still missing. During this long waiting period, Christy's mother, Sandy Wesselman, remained an unwavering voice of persistence and hope. She continued to speak publicly about her daughter's case, often participating in interviews around the anniversaries of Christy's death. Her advocacy became a quiet but enduring force behind the scenes, reminding law enforcement and the broader public that her daughter's story had not been forgotten. Each year, the family marked Christy's birthday with tributes, reflections, and calls for justice.
My daughter Christy and I were going to watch old movies and relax at home.
Throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, DNA technology continued to evolve. National databases expanded, as states began requiring DNA samples from individuals convicted of a wider range of crimes, including certain misdemeanors. As the database grew, so did the chances of eventually finding a match. Yet, year after year, Christy's case remained unresolved. The DNA sat in a file, conclusive but unmatched. In 2011, law enforcement took a new step by releasing photographs of jewelry believed to have been worn by Christy at the time of the crime. The hope was that someone might recognize the missing items, particularly a cross necklace, and come forward with information. Though the photos circulated in local media and online, no credible leads emerged. It was another reminder of how cold cases, even those armed with modern technology, still relied on people to speak up. Then, finally, in 2015, the long-awaited breakthrough arrived. A man named Michael R. Jones, who had recently been arrested in Champaign, Illinois, for a domestic battery charge, had his DNA entered into the National Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. The database automatically compared his sample to those from unsolved crimes across the country. One of those matches hit immediately. It was a direct match to the DNA collected from Kristy Wesselman's body in 1985. After 30 years of waiting, the name behind the profile had been found. The match was undeniable. Jones, who had a prior conviction for rape in 1977 and had served time in prison, had slipped through the cracks of the system for years. His earlier crimes had not triggered a DNA entry because of the laws in place at the time. It was only through the updated policies requiring DNA for newer arrests that his profile was finally added. And with that addition came justice. Delayed, but not denied. For the investigators who had worked on the case for decades, the moment brought both relief and emotion. For Christy's family, it was a day they had both prayed for and feared. The man who had taken their daughter from them had been living in Illinois all along, moving on with his life as theirs remained frozen in grief. Now, he would finally face the consequences. The cold case era of Kristy Wesselman's murder had ended, not with a confession, but with the quiet, conclusive certainty of science. What followed would be a courtroom reckoning, and for the first time in 30 years, Christy's name would be spoken not as a question, but in pursuit of justice. The arrest and charges. When the DNA match was confirmed in 2015, law enforcement officials moved quickly to act on what had eluded them for 3 decades. Michael R. Jones, a 62-year-old man living in Champaign, Illinois, was arrested on July 2, 2015. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when officers from DuPage County arrived in Champaign to take Jones into custody. There was no dramatic standoff or attempt to flee. Jones, now a gray-haired man with a history of violence hidden in his past, was taken by surprise. For years, he had lived in relative anonymity, his name unknown to the public, and his crimes largely forgotten by the justice system. But with the DNA match tying him directly to the murder of Kristy Wesselman, there was no denying the truth. News of the arrest spread quickly throughout Glen Ellyn and surrounding communities. For many who had grown up in the area during the 80s, it was a sudden reopening of a deep emotional wound. Christy's name, long associated with an unsolved tragedy, now reappeared in headlines alongside the man accused of ending her life. The arrest brought with it a strange mix of emotions: relief, disbelief, grief, and anger. For Christy's family, the arrest was a long-awaited answer, but it also meant reliving the details of the crime all over again. Michael Jones was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of aggravated criminal assault. At the time of Christy's death, Jones had already served a prison sentence for a separate sexual assault conviction in 1977. In that earlier case, he had been sentenced to 10 years, but was released after serving only 6. That crime, much like Christy's case, involved violence and predatory behavior. The fact that he had been released early, and that he had not been required to submit a DNA sample when he re-entered society, was a painful reminder of the systemic gaps in offender tracking and accountability. Had DNA laws existed at the time of his previous conviction, or had his sample been collected earlier, Christy's murder might have been solved years sooner. Following his arrest, Jones was extradited to DuPage County to stand trial. He appeared in court in a beige jail uniform, older now but still bearing the weight of what he had done. The courtroom was packed with reporters, officials, and members of Christy's family, including her mother, Sandy, who sat silently as the man accused of killing her daughter was formally charged. For Sandy and her family, this was not a moment of celebration. It was one of solemn reckoning. They had waited 3 decades for this moment, and while justice seemed within reach, it came with a flood of painful memories.
Jones was charged after his DNA matched samples from the crime scene following his 2015 conviction in Champaign County for domestic battery.
The prosecution worked swiftly to build its case. With the DNA evidence forming the foundation of the charges, the state had what it called overwhelming proof of Jones's guilt. The DNA collected from Christy's body in 1985 matched Jones's profile perfectly, a 1 in billions match that left no room for doubt. Prosecutors also revisited evidence from the original investigation, including crime scene photos, medical examiners' reports, and statements from the original detectives. Everything pointed to Jones. His violent past only underscored the danger he posed, and had posed, for decades. Jones's defense attorney argued for time to review the evidence and consider a plea, signaling early on that a full jury trial might not be necessary. Over the course of several months, court hearings continued, and the Wesselman family sat through each one. Each appearance was a reminder of the time they had lost, the questions they had lived with, and the pain they had endured in silence. Public reaction to the arrest was one of sadness and anger. Many questioned how a man with a known violent history could have gone unnoticed for so long. Residents of Glen Ellyn expressed renewed gratitude for advances in forensic science, but also frustration at how long justice had taken. Jones had lived freely, while Christy's family carried the burden of grief for decades. For the Wesselmans, the arrest brought with it no sense of closure, only a necessary step toward justice. Sandy Wesselman later said that the moment she heard the name Michael R. Jones, she felt a shift in the world, as if a long-awaited answer had finally arrived. But it was an answer wrapped in pain. Her daughter's voice had been silenced. But now, after 30 years, the truth would finally be spoken for her. In court, on the record, and in the pursuit of justice that never stopped. Following his arrest in 2015, Michael R. Jones faced mounting evidence in the case of Kristy Wesselman's murder. The DNA match was definitive, and his criminal history made it clear that this was not his first offense. Rather than take the case to trial, Jones chose to enter a guilty plea in 2016. He admitted to attacking and killing Christy on the day she disappeared in 1985. The courtroom was silent as he spoke those words. Words Christy's family had waited over 30 years to hear. During the sentencing hearing, Christy's mother, Sandy Wesselman, addressed the court with a powerful statement about her daughter's life and the pain her family had endured. She described Christy as a bright, kind girl whose life was cut short without reason. Her words moved the courtroom and served as a reminder that behind every crime statistic is a family forever changed. Michael Jones was sentenced to 80 years in prison. Under Illinois law, he would be required to serve the majority of that sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Christy's family, the sentence offered some measure of justice. Though no punishment could ever bring their daughter back, the case had finally reached its conclusion. Not forgotten, but resolved with the truth finally in the open. Community impact. Kristy Wesselman's story left a permanent mark on her family, her community, and the broader criminal justice system. Her death shattered the sense of safety in Glen Ellyn and forced many to confront the reality that violent crime can touch even the most peaceful places. For years, her name became synonymous with a question: who could do something so terrible? But after decades of waiting, that question was finally answered, and Christy's memory shifted from a story of loss to one of perseverance and justice. The case highlighted both the limits of 80s investigative tools and the power of modern forensic science. Christy's family, especially her mother, Sandy, became quiet advocates for improved cold case procedures and the importance of preserving evidence. Her unrelenting hope and public strength inspired many and reminded others that justice can take time, but it should never be abandoned. Today, Christy is remembered not just as a victim, but as a daughter, a friend, and a young woman whose life meant something. Memorials in her name, quiet moments of reflection at Glen South High School, and the enduring presence of her family in the community ensure that her legacy lives on. Her story continues to serve as both a warning and a source of hope, proof that while time may pass, truth and justice can still prevail. Kristy Wesselman's case also underscored the importance of community involvement in criminal investigations. Over the years, the residents of Glen Ellyn remained vigilant, demonstrating how collective concern and awareness can keep a case alive in the public conscience. Community vigils, awareness campaigns, and local media coverage helped maintain pressure on law enforcement to continue pursuing justice, even when leads were scarce. This ongoing engagement reminded officials that victims and their families rely not only on technology, but on human compassion and persistence to bring closure to tragic events. For more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.